You look familiar.
I got that a lot.
To Midnight. This one is directed by Mark Savage, who also co-wrote the movie, and it stars Robert Bronzi, that Charles Bronson lookalike, aka Robert Kovacs, and here he plays Detective Toth. Alongside him you've got a supporting cast from Tito Ortiz to Sadie Katz. Now obviously Robert Bronzi has made a career for himself sort of impersonating Charles Bronson, doing movies that sounds a little bit similar to previous Charles Bronson movies, or have a kind of a similar sort of premise. What's the actual story of this particular movie? So Bronzi, as I say, plays this detective, Detective Toth, and he is a no-nonsense, hard-boiled, hard-drinking detective who doesn't play well with others. His wife was murdered a few months before in a savage murder, and there have been further murders that have a similar MO. Very savage, bodies ripped up, in fact almost inhuman you might say. And the killer may well be inhuman. In actual fact, we learn very early on that it is in fact a werewolf. And now it is up to Detective Toth to figure out maybe who this werewolf is. There's a number of suspects there. And obviously have that confrontation, get revenge for his wife and put an end to these killings. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss 12 to Midnight. So obviously this is sort of taking homage, you might say, from the kind of the police dramas. Obviously the likes of 10 to Midnight from yesteryear. And the movie's pace is more akin to those style of movies rather than the more high-octane, modern-style kind of action movies. That's not to say that there's not action in it, but it is more about the kind of the interactions between the characters and the finding out of the suspects and things like that. So this movie has a slower pace. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a slow-paced movie exactly, but a slower-paced movie than maybe action films typically are in the kind of the 2020s. One of the elements that I did like in the movie is that there is a genuine amount of suspects, and you know, we get like 4 or so different kind of potentials about who this werewolf might actually be, and we get a reasonable amount of screen time for each of them. And we as the audience, you know, we don't know who's going to be the werewolf. Some are kind of more obviously red herrings than others, shall I say, but nonetheless I actually thought he did a decent job here of setting up some potential interesting kind of suspects, all of whom seem a little bit kind of shady in one way or another, so that was kind of quite fun. And as we say, as the movie goes on, we have a lot of little sort of side quests, you know, investigating different suspects and various kind of attacks from the werewolf, killing its victims in sort of somewhat kind of gory fashion. We even get a little bit of a romance subplot with Tony Katz's character. So I think the production value for a low budget movie is kind of quite kind of fun and quite, you know, quite sort of, you know, acceptable for the kind of the level of movie that it is. It's not trying to be a particularly kind of flashy movie in some ways. I mean, there's one aspect where I do feel the budget and the kind of the production value is a little weaker on, but we'll come on to that. But in regards to kind of the general technical side, the shooting and the kind of the sound design, I've got to say it's all kind of quite proficiently kind of put together, and the kind of the nature of the story is quite compelling, especially as I say, if you more akin to the kind of the older style, you know, early 80s pace of movies back then. So that was all pretty good. Bronzi, I mean, he's not the best actor, let's be honest. His native tongue is Hungarian, and he obviously struggles with the English language. He has got better as time has gone on. They do wisely keep his lines to somewhat of a minimum, which gives him this kind of silent macho guy type persona. But in reality, I think it's because, you know, he struggles maybe with a lot of the kind of the dialogue sequences. But like I say, in the general kind of scheme of things, you might say it's, you know, a little awkward, but if you are familiar with Bronzi's work up until this point, you know, it's certainly, you can see like a kind of an improvement there. And there is a lot of kind of sort of familiar genre actors here that kind of show up. Dan Roebuck, for example. You know, so you have a good amount of like, oh, I know that guy, I recognise her, that sort of thing through the movie to kind of, I think, satisfy kind of genre fans or B-movie fans and things like that. The story itself, as I say, it's not obviously dissimilar to other movies, but injecting this kind of werewolf element into it, I wouldn't go so far maybe because it's not really a horror exactly. It has horror elements, but it does play more like a police procedure, but it gives it that kind of the interesting over-the-top edge to a large degree. What doesn't work, okay, the werewolf itself, I have to say, is probably the most disappointing element to this. The werewolf makeup, it looks like someone's had a really bad allergic reaction, you know, at times. This is maybe aimed to be more of your classic Wolfman style look rather than your more bestial werewolf sort of design here. But I've got to say, it kind of just looks like a Halloween mask. The werewolf is disappointing. There are actually some reasonable like guts and intestines that you know that we sort of see as VFX, practical VFX, but the werewolf itself is by far and away the cheapest and kind of most ropey part of the movie. And they also kind of have quite messed around with the werewolf lore. For example, we have this werewolf out in the daylight at times. And it even contradicts itself to a degree. There's a little bit of dialogue that says, like, experienced werewolves can transform in the day and have more control over it. But the movie, when we find out who this werewolf might be, we learn that it's a relatively young werewolf. It's only sort of 6 months since it was turned. So it's like, no, it kind of contradicts itself to a little bit in that regard. So there is that. I will say I think some of the kind of like little side quests are feel a bit misjudged. The kind of romance between Toth and Stacey Katz's character, she's like a sheriff in a neighbouring county, really felt like it sort of came out of nowhere and wasn't earned and just kind of felt a little bit awkward at times. We're introduced to a couple of characters who don't really have any purpose in the movie. I won't say who, because I don't want to kind of, you know, say maybe who isn't kind of really involved. But there are some characters here that you're thinking, why are they even here? They just serve to kind of like burn runtime of the movie. The movie suggests that there are another werewolf that turned this particular one, but it's never addressed by our characters as to that is being a concern. So, you know, and also that the way that they jump, the way they kind of just accept that it's a werewolf more or less straight away. I mean, they find like wolf hair at the crime scenes, so they just go, oh, it could be a werewolf kind of thing. But it's not like, could this guy be wearing like wolf skins or something like that? It's kind of like, okay, they more or less accept it's a werewolf, which again, just is that sort of B-movie thing, I guess. So you can't really say this movie is particularly kind of like trying to be a down-to-earth and gritty movie, because it's definitely kind of like has schlocky elements. And as I say, I even think like maybe it would have been better not to have this as a werewolf, and maybe to have it as a kind of killer. Maybe that would have been too similar to 10 to Midnight. I don't know. Maybe this was trying to give it a sort of point of difference and maybe appeal to horror fans. But I got to say, I think that was the kind of the weakest element to this film. Overall, it's okay. You know, it's okay if you don't mind low-budget action movies. If you're a werewolf fan, I don't know. I don't know if I would really recommend this one, to be honest. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.